Hey, thanks for joining Curtis and I. We're at the well here at Rehoboth Baptist Church. We're so glad you joined us to talk about the law and Jesus' fulfillment of that law. So tune in. Thank you. So what was the purpose of the law? Obviously Moses was the one who wrote the vast majority of it.
Paul. Okay, let's start from the beginning. The law, in one sense, was their constitution, their Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights first, 10 amendments of the Constitution. So it was their Constitution, and their religious covenant with God at the same time. Because if you look at it in the law, the first 4 commands all have to do with their relationship with God. I'm your only God. No idols. Remember the Sabbath and honor my name. So that's their religious responsibility. That's the first thing God lays down. We got an exclusive relationship because in 19, basically, they make the covenant. He says, if the people do this, Moses goes down and he tells the people that all that the Lord says, we'll agree. Mm-hmm. So they basically make the covenant in 19. So God says, okay, here it is. I'm your God. And it's only me, no images of me. Sabbath day, keep it holy, keep my name reverent among you. But the law gave them how they should worship God. Because, you got those first 4, and then you got other things in there where he lays down the feast and different things as it goes on. The feast days and how they should sacrifice and all that. So that tells them how to worship God, live in covenant with him. But then the law also told them how to worship, not worship, but to live with each other. Because, don't kill, don't steal, don't covet your neighbor's wife or anything in your neighbor's house. Don't bear false witness, all those things. So first half, with the first 4 commandments and expounded on throughout the rest of the law, how to live in covenant with God. Second half, if you will, of 10 commandments, the next 60%, I guess, really. Next 6 is how to live with each other. In society in general, in your home, don't commit adultery, honor your father and mother. So the law, if 19 is them making a covenant with God, the law is, here's the covenant. This is how you live with me. The first 4 commandments, and then the rest of them he'll bring up with sacrifices and stuff like Exodus and other places, Leviticus, especially Leviticus. But then the other parts of the law is how we live with each other. In the 10 commandments, the thou shalt nots. But then you get into like Exodus. When we were in Exodus, we were just in there for a little while. If you don't know, we were in Exodus for about 18 months or something like that. I think it was 18 months. But there's a section in Exodus, and I can't remember exactly where it starts. I think chapter 23. But I remember calling it the Great Society, because if they followed the things God laid down in that section, it would have been the greatest society the world ever saw. Because in that society, God talked about slavery. We think about slavery, we think about American slavery. With chattel, your property. I own you, and I own everything that comes from you. With them, slavery was limited to 6 years. And in the 7th year, you got to let them go. And even with slaves, God said, you can't do this. If you hit a slave, you make him lose an eye, you got to let him go. He laid down laws for how you treat your slaves. He laid down laws for how you treat foreigners. He reminded them, remember, you were foreigners.
And at the time, there weren't forced labor, right? It would have been somebody selling themselves into slavery to pay off a debt.
Or when they went to war, they would take prisoners as slaves. But most of the time, it was somebody selling themselves off or a family member to pay for debt. And God says you can work them for 6 years. And he laid down, these are the things you cannot do to them. You must remember, these are human beings and your brothers. So you cannot do these things. And in the 7th year, you got to let them go. The year of Jubilee. They got it, which, again, totally different from American. They call it chattel slavery.
Yeah. And that slavery was so different from what we even understand that they literally had to have laws in place for if the slave wanted to come back. Right,
yeah. And he said, if slave says, being your slave, I've got a master, I've been given a wife, I've got children, I don't want to leave. Yeah, and it was the whole thing. They go to the He takes an awl and they go to a door, I think, and he puts a hole in his ear, and that man's a slave forever now because he chose it. But again, that first half is how do you live in covenant with God? Okay, that's spiritual. The second half, if you will, or the other part of the law is how you live in covenant with each other. How do we, as a bunch of whole different people, even though they were all Jews, and they had some foreigners in there, who knows how many, but some people of mixed race. But how do we live together as a society? And God laid all that out in the law as well. So if you look at the immediate context of the law, it's how to live with me, how to live with each other. But then the law, in the New Testament says the law shows us our need for Christ because nobody can keep it. Nobody can perfectly keep the law. I mean, I can try to keep the letter of the law. I've never killed anybody in the literal sense. But when Jesus was on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, I think it's 43 to 48, when he says, you have heard. He said, you've heard, don't kill, He said, I tell you, whoever is angry with his brother, you've broken the spirit of it right there. So another part of the law, the immediate part, is how to live with God and each other. But another part is to show you can't keep it. It's impossible for you to keep it.
Yeah.
Paul in Galatians says it was like a schoolmaster that brought us to Christ. And it contacts, again, in slavery back then, you might have a highly educated slave. He could have been a professor somewhere, a greatly educated man who, through war or something, became your slave. You bought him, and now he's teaching your children. And he might take them to whatever, I think they did have some public school type, academy type things. They had gymnasiums and stuff, but he might take them there. They're under his tutelage. Even though one day he's going to be the master. Right now he's under my tutelage. He has to listen to me, because Daddy's put him in my charge. And Paul says the law was like that for us. It was a schoolmaster showing us, and basically showing us, you need something greater than the law to make you righteous before God. You need Christ.
So prior to Christ, prior to Jesus, whenever they were unable to keep the law, the law required them to do sacrifice.
Right. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that would have been how they would have rectified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a poor analogy, but you've done something wrong, or maybe you haven't done something wrong. You just failed to do something though, and you want to say I'm sorry. So you come home with flowers or whatever might cheer up your wife.
Sure.
Make her more agreeable to forgiving you. Well, okay, we sin, or they sinned, and sin had to be paid for. It had to be atoned for in some way. And so the sacrifices was what God laid down. They weren't what ultimately he wanted, but they pointed to what he ultimately wanted, which was Christ. Because I mentioned it yesterday, John 1:29. John saw Jesus walking toward him, and he said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This is the perfect Lamb who, once his blood is shed, all sin has been paid for.
Yeah.
Instead of having to pay for sin over and over and over by sacrificing.
Law's purpose was to show us how vast of a difference we are from our separation from God.
Right. Yeah.
Sacrifice was there to atone for our sins.
Yeah.
People, whenever Jesus was having Jesus said what?
Right.
Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees.
Yeah.
People would have looked at the Pharisees as being righteous because they would have been the closest to following the law as possible.
Yeah, at least, in their perspective, yeah. Because the Pharisees' idea was to follow the law strictly, be strict adherence to the law, but they also included the traditions of the elders. Rabbi so-and-so said this 100 years ago, and so they considered that as important, because I read the passage yesterday where they were complaining about Jesus' disciples not washing their hands before they ate, which was the tradition of the elders. It was nothing scriptural, but it was just tradition. But that was all a part of it, and they wanted to try to keep it, and yet Jesus said they were actors. He called them hypocrites, which is literally somebody playing a part. They played the part of righteous men. They played the part like they were keeping the law. But in Matthew 23, which I made reference to yesterday but didn't actually read it, I should have put it up on the screen. But it's like 23 verses 13 to 33 or something like that, where he gives these woes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, actors, because you do this, but you don't do that. And at one point he said, you give a tithe of all your spices, mint and cumin and dill, I think he specifically mentioned, but you neglect the more important matters of the law, right? Mercy and justice. And he said, you should have given your tithe of your spices without neglecting being merciful and just. So when the people saw him outwardly, they did. They looked great. I mean, they looked like the closest thing you could get to God, because they were doing all these religious things, giving to the poor and fasting a couple of times a week and praying in public on the street corners, Jesus said. So, they looked up to him because they looked like people who were committed to keeping the law. And that's not to say that they didn't in a lot of ways, or that all of them were necessarily.
Well, they could have been really close, right?
Yeah.
It only takes one sin,
right,
to separate you from God.
Yeah, but these particular, I don't know if you say all of them, or at least the ones who Jesus had constant interaction with, he just called hypocrites. He just called them actors because they were pretending to be righteous. It's not to say that there was some he didn't have intercourse with who were righteous men. Sure. And certainly Nicodemus, when he shows up. I was going to say,
I was watching The Chosen the other day, and they represent him as being a follower, for sure.
Yeah, and Jesus, the way Jesus talks to him, Jesus is not critical of Nicodemus at all. He challenges him, you don't understand, you have to be born from above. But he never said, you're one of those hypocrites just like the rest of these guys, because he obviously wasn't like the rest of those guys. And somewhere, maybe chapter 7, they want to kill him, and Nicodemus stands up for him and says, does our law kill someone or condemn someone without first hearing him out? So it's like, okay. And then they just all departed from there. So, and I think, what was it, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus buried him, buried Jesus after his death. So he certainly was not, by the way Scripture portrays him, not by the way Jesus spoke to him and addressed him. He certainly wasn't a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But I think the ones that he had a lot of intercourse with were just actors, as he called them.
Right.
But so okay, we got the law showing us how to live with God and each other. We got the law showing us when we have sinned, which we have done, or they, I should say. This is how you get right with God again when you sin. These are the sacrifices you'll offer, or these are the things you do to stay right with God. We have these feasts you have to do. We have these regulations you must abide by. But ultimately, it was showing us that we needed somebody and something greater than just it, which is Jesus, who, Matthew 5:20 yesterday, he came to fulfill, 5:17 to 19, he came to fulfill the law.
Yeah. So his fulfillment of the law was the final sacrifice.
Yes. Yep. When he gave his life, he fulfilled every requirement. I mean, he lived that perfect life, and then he gave his life as the last and greatest sacrifice, as John said, the lamb that took away the sins of the world. And yes, and if you want to add in the prophets, because remember he says the law and the prophets. So he kept the prophets by rising again from the grave, and ascending back to heaven. But he fulfilled everything written in it. Yeah, absolutely. Taught it perfectly, lived it perfectly, and then everything it said about him what does that was his job description, if you will. He fulfilled everything in his job description, in which you being an employer, you're probably looking for that. Okay, he's supposed to do this. I got to talk to him because he's not doing that. Well, everything in his job description he did.
Yeah.
Everything. And so, yeah, he absolutely perfectly fulfilled it.
Jesus says what? But in that he says, you have to be more righteous than the Pharisees.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the people listening to that would have assumed that was works.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, I got to work harder. I got to do this. I got to do that.
Yep.
But you mentioned a few verses, Philippians 3, chapter 3, verses 18 or 8
to
10 or 11.
10 or 11, something like that, yeah.
And there was others that you mentioned, but basically said it's not by any works.
Right.
It's just by faith.
Yep. Yeah, Paul said, I want to be found for righteousness, not of my own that comes through the law.
Yeah.
But the righteousness that comes through faith. Yeah.
What is righteousness?
Simply put, being in a right relationship with God. And when you're in a right relationship with God, then that's demonstrated through right action, right motives, right thoughts. I'm in the right relationship with God, and these things are right. My actions, my motives, my thoughts, my intents,
And Paul is saying it's not by any of the works that you do.
Right.
It's by your faith alone.
Yeah, yeah. Think of Paul. I mean, he was a Pharisee. He knew, you and I looking at the outside at these guys going, wow, they're so holy, and Paul's dealing with them.
Mm-hmm.
He knows these guys aren't holy at all. He knows they're actors. He knows he's on the inside of this thing. And so he says, I don't want that.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been that person.
Yep. And I know it can't do anything. And so, yeah, he says, I want the righteousness that comes with faith, by faith in God.
Yeah.
Which is why, you look at Romans, he talks about Abraham, and Romans, what is that? 4 or 5, where he talks about how was Abraham justified, and he talks about he was justified by faith.
Yeah. You mentioned Romans 6 yesterday, 17.
6:17. They obeyed from the heart.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Romans. Well, it starts in 4, but he's talking about Abraham being made righteous by faith. But it starts in Romans 4, and it keeps going into 5. But he knew works won't do it. And, obviously it's the Spirit of God, but this man has got all this theological education and biblical knowledge from the Old Testament, and he knew Abraham wasn't justified by the things he did. He was justified by faith, and he even quotes, Genesis 15:6. I had that in my notes. I don't know if I used it yesterday, but, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted or credited to him for righteousness. Mm-hmm. And he talks about that. And so he knows that righteousness don't come from works. I've been around these guys all my life watching their works, and their works are phony, fake, hypocritical. They won't make you righteous. And so he said, I want the righteousness like Abraham had that came through faith. His was believing God's promise that you're going to have these descendants, like the stars, and numerous as the stars of the skies and sand on the beach, just can't be counted. And he believed that at 75 or whatever he was when he had no children. And our righteousness comes by believing God when he says, trust my son, put your faith in him. And he says, I want the righteousness that comes through faith. So, but it's always interesting. There is something in us, and the devil, I think, exploits it, that we always think we can do something. We have to do something. We can do something. You hear people talking about, well, I've been good, and when I die, I'm sure, I've done enough good.
Yeah. Donald Trump's been saying that lately.
Yes, I remember we had a president saying that, and it's like, Mr. President, that won't do it.
Which is funny, because he said the next week, I'm not good enough. I won't get to heaven.
Yes. And it's like, somebody will say, no, you're not good enough. But
That's the point.
yes.
The point is you're not good enough.
Yep.
And it
But
requires a relationship with Christ.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, on the one hand, I roll my eyes, but on the other hand, it's like, well, maybe God will use that in his heart, though.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know.
What I do know is that it's different than what he was saying 4 years ago or 8 years ago.
And so, look, maybe, you know, he's 80 years old. Not in the greatest of health, you know. They talk about some of his issues. I remember a few months ago it was the fat ankles, and they go, "Oh, it's the president's ankles so fat." You know, maybe he's sensing his own mortality because he's talked more about things like that.
Yeah.
In the last few months, and so maybe he is, you know, sensing his own mortality, and you know, he says things like that because that's honestly maybe where he's thinking.
There's a correlation between Charlie Kirk passing away and him starting to talk about it. Well, wrong look, or right, wrong. But
he almost got shot. You know, well, he did get shot.
Yeah.
But you know, maybe between that and Charlie Kirk, maybe God is working in his heart. Who knows? You can only pray that he is. But he talks about, you know, heaven and, you know, hoping to get there. So maybe one day.
And he talks about actions. Hey, if I do this, then maybe I get to heaven.
Right.
And that's where people are trying to be as righteous as the Pharisees. Right. You can't do it.
And see, I think the devil plays. I think he loves that because he gets the idea that you can do something. You know, if you're good enough, if you give enough, if you avoid all the bad things, you know, because he knows that derails us better than anything. Because I think I'm doing the right thing.
Well, it's so much easier, and we've had this conversation before, but it's so much easier to live life with a checklist.
Yes.
And a whiteboard where you can, okay, I'm starting over again today.
Yep.
And check.
Yep.
I'm right with God. And that's not the way it works.
You know, the Pharisees, when they prayed, you know, mentioned yesterday, Luke 18, the Pharisee says, I thank God I'm not like other men. Not like these swindlers and all these people, not like this tax collector. You know, I do this and I do that. And it's easy to feel that way, you know. I mean, any one of us could look out there and say, well, I'm not like my neighbor who does this, that, and the other thing. Or, you know, we go to jail every couple of months. I'm not like these guys who are in jail. But we all tend to think that way. And I think it works so effectively because the devil has us thinking, do this, that's the right way, when he knows that's the exact wrong. You know, we're thinking it's going to lead us to heaven, and he knows that's going to lead you straight to hell. And I think he just plays with that in all of us. Even after we get saved, I think he uses that works idea on us, that I have to do something. And the reality is the one who fulfilled the law did everything for me. You know, he died, he was buried, he was resurrected for my sins, you know. And Paul says resurrected for our justification, you know. But I think he uses that and he plays with that and he beats us up with that. And people all over the world, Islam believes that, I don't want to misquote, but I think I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that they believe that all your works is balanced in scales at the judgment.
Yeah.
And, you know, the good outweighs the bad in the scales. That's good for you. But if not,
Well, and there's things that you could do that are really great that at the end of your life you can do to save you. It's like, I can.
Right. Yeah.
And it is really uncomfortable. It's so much easier to depend on yourself.
Right.
And your works than it is to put your faith in Christ.
Right. And human nature, again, and I don't know how that plays, but pride is one of the things that caused Satan to fall. You know, those I wills in Isaiah. I will do this. I will do that. Those 5 I wills. Last one being, I will be like the Most High God. And then Ezekiel talks about him being corrupted, you know. And it says he was perfect in every way until, I think, iniquity was found in him, I think is where it says it in Ezekiel. But, you know, obviously pride was a part of it. And in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis calls pride the great sin. So I think that Satan uses that. It caused his demise. It causes ours because, you know, you could be good enough. you're better than them and them and him over there. And I think he uses that in us, just like it caused him to fall. He used it to make us fall. Mm-hmm. You know, it keeps me from getting saved, or if I am saved, I'm still thinking I'm so good, you know, because I'm better than them. And it keeps me from really being where I should be, which is I'm nothing save for Christ.
Yeah.
You know, saved for the righteousness he covers me with, you know, when I get saved. I'm nothing. And so he beats on us. But when you talk about their righteousness has to be greater than that of the scribes and Pharisees, theirs was dependent on works and it was hypocritical. And ours is dependent on faith in him, you know, sincere faith in him. And once that's done, you put your faith in him, you know, that positionally makes you righteous as far as God's concerned, you know. You promote a guy, you make him director of quality control. That's his position. Whether I like it or not is irrelevant. Whether he feels like he deserves it or not, totally irrelevant, right? If you made him that, he is.
Yeah.
Well, God, 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. So he took our sin upon him on the cross. When we trust Christ, God gives us all his righteousness. He sees us as righteous as his son. Whether I feel that way about you, whether I feel that way about myself, is totally irrelevant. That's the position God has put me in, you know. And if you can put a guy in a position and it doesn't matter what other people say, then wow, what better
Absolutely. When
God puts me in a position. So,
yeah. Any last thoughts? Any things that you didn't say on Sunday that you were looking back thinking that you should have said?
You know, I honestly haven't had time to think about it, but I guess if anything, it's always just that constant realization of we have become more righteous than the Pharisees, but it wasn't us; it was Christ.
In fact, it's the opposite of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the opposite of the works that we were doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That allowed us to be closer to Christ.
It is because of Christ, you know, who made us righteous, and whether I feel that way or you feel that way about me, really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
God says that's who I am, or that's who you are.
Sure.
So I think I may have hit that, but just to hit it again, because it's so important to remember that. Because Satan will beat us down. Okay, I couldn't keep them from getting saved. Rats. Mm-hmm. Well, I can keep them from really having the joy of their salvation and being productive in their salvation, you know, by thinking them think they're still rotten wretches when God says, nah, not really.
Yeah.
I made you different. Made you better. So
awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today. If you guys are around Kirksville, come to church on Sunday. We'd love to see you. If you're not, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it.